Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode on the Wojennik TV YouTube channel. Today I would like to invite you to watch a new review on our channel, and this will be a review of one of the games that I was very eager to try in the last months. It is a game which will transport us to the Eastern Front during World War II and will cover one of the biggest battles in history, the Battle of Stalingrad. The game is called Stalingrad, Inferno on the Volga, and it was published by VentoNuovo Games in 2018. This is a game which covers the first part of this epic battle, so from August to November 1942, and it will depict the battle for the city. So it will not concentrate on the Operation Uranus, which ultimately led to this total destruction of the Sixth German Army in Stalingrad. It will cover the battle for the city, so the period when the Germans tried to seize Stalingrad. The game is designed by Emanuele Sant'Andrea, and it is supposed to be played primarily solo, because it is a solo design. But thanks to some clever additional rules, it is also possible to play this game with 2 players or even with 3 players. So we have quite a few possibilities, and it is absolutely possible to play it in a larger group than solo it. The game was initially launched on Kickstarter, and the initial goal was to gather $10,000. In the end, the project closed with nearly $70,000, so thanks to it, the game was published in a really high quality, which I will show you in a few moments. The time of play is somewhere around 60-90 minutes. I have seen information that it is possible to end a game in 30 minutes. I would say it is closer to 60. The minimum age of the player is 8 or higher, but I'd say it's about 10 to 12 years old, unless you are playing cooperatively, which is also one of the modes. Today I would like to show you the game, then explain briefly what are its mechanics, and at the end, as usually, I would like to give you my final thoughts and my final recommendation. So let's begin. Here is Stalingrad, Inferno on the Volga from VentoNuovo Games. Now, as you can see, the game depicts the battle for Stalingrad fought between the 23rd of August to 20th November 1942. So it will enable us to recreate the first part of the battle, during which the German forces tried to seize Stalingrad. And this will be our objective during the game, because while playing the solo version of the game, we will be playing the Germans, and we will be trying to take control of the major points in the Stalingrad city. Our main objective will be to occupy the 6 spawn hexes, which are depicted by a red circle, or rather by a red hex side, and there are 6 of those hexes. One of those hexes is located in the northern part, just on the outskirts of Stalingrad. 4 of them are, as you can see, alongside the Volga River, and 1 is at the southern part of the city, so at the southern outskirts. Now, this is not an easy objective, because all of those hexes will be defended by Soviet forces. This is a block game, so we will be using blocks, both for the Soviet and for the German side. Those blocks will be at first placed downwards, so the fog of war aspect will be present, but then when a combat takes place, those blocks will be uncovered and we will be able to see what forces are opposing our own. Those blocks, as you can see, depict the infantry, the panzer units which fought in Stalingrad, both from the German as also from the Soviet perspective. Each block has a certain number of strength points depicted by those small dots. The color of the dots is also important because the number of dots is the number of steps that a unit has. When such a unit takes a step loss, it is turned in such a way that it loses one circle. The colors also are important, as I said a few moments ago, because the color of those circles will influence the probability to obtain a hit during combat. The red dots are the most powerful ones because while attacking with such a unit, you will score a hit rolling a 4, 5 and a 6 on the dice. When you have a white dot, you will score a hit rolling a 5 or 6, and finally with a black dot you will score a hit only while rolling a 6. Those blocks are at the beginning of the game put in specific places. From the Soviet perspective, they will be placed on hexes with a shaded block side space, whereas the German units will be put onto some starting places, for instance on hex Y or hexes X or W. At the beginning of the game there will be only 7 German units on the entire board, and this board, as you can see, is a fantastic one. It is really gorgeous, one of the prettiest ones that I have recently seen. It depicts not only the city of Stalingrad alongside the Volga river, but also the city outskirts and some spaces which are further from the city. The map board had been made based on aerial reconnaissance photos made in August 1942. So if we take a closer look at this map, you can see that the hexes have a lot of details. We have some terrain features, we have some small houses depicted here and there. So this is really a fantastic, very detailed map. This map is in 2 versions. You receive both a paper and also a mounted map board. This one is mounted, and believe me, the quality of it is really very high. We have 3 types of hexes, 3 types of spaces. The first one is clear terrain, which has a shaded blue hex, white hex side. It is much easier to travel through such a hex, especially for panzer units. The second type is rough terrain, which represents some hexes with some hills, with some forests, or other more difficult terrain features. And finally we have the urban hexes, which have the white circles. The difference between those 3 types of hexes consists both in the possibility of making long moves and also they influence combat, because for instance in urban hexes the defender will always roll first and apply his hits before the attacker can respond. Apart from the blocks, apart from the fantastic map that we receive in this game, we will also be using cards, because Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga is a card-assisted block game. Both sides will have their own deck of cards, and those cards will represent different battle assets. For instance, Heinkels, which are not only represented by a card but also by a fantastic plain model which can be placed onto the board in order to additionally increase the chrome and the feeling of fighting a real battle. We have the officers, so for instance Paulus, who gives us an additional benefit in the possibility of drawing 1 additional card each time we draw a card. We have some howitzers, we have some Stuka bombers, which will also have their own miniature used during gameplay. Those cards will be used during attacks, and the officers will be placed beside the battlefield and they will grant us some benefits. The Soviet deck is also constructed and composed of battle assets used during the battle. So we can, for instance, run into a T-44, which is dug in onto a hex reinforced by the Volga River flotilla. We can run into anti-aircraft guns, or we can also draw some officers, for instance, Vasily Chuikov, who will grant the Soviet units additional capabilities in the form of opportunity fire. There is also a card associated to Vasily Zaitsev, and there is also a card associated to Comrade Khrushchev, who will not only who will on one hand increase the firepower of the Soviet units, but on the second hand will also cause some losses in case we roll ones. So those cards are additional assets which give the game some additional depth, and which enable to simulate some events or introduce some characters who fought during the battle during the 1942 campaign. Apart from those elements, we receive some additional discs, wooden discs or cubes, which are, for instance, used to track control of hexes, or which are used to depict hexes on which rubble had been made. Rubble is created when, during a battle, we roll dice which sum is greater than 18. We use some modifiers which are due to the cards that we play. Those modifiers are also due to the number of hexes from which we attack, or the number or the type of units that we use during attacks. We receive some additional features, for instance, dogs which depict the hexes through which the Soviet reinforcements can enter the game, or even we receive a miniature representing the Red October factory. So some additional fantastic components which make this board even prettier. What is the objective of the game while playing solo? While playing the Germans, our objective will be to take control of all the spawn hexes, as I mentioned earlier. Another way to win the game is to eliminate all the Soviet blocks from the board, but this possibility is rather a very abstract one. I can't see how this could happen. Maybe it is possible, but I wasn't even close during each of my games that I played. At the same time, there are also some end game conditions which cause you to lose the game. The first one will be to take too many losses, because German units which are eliminated during a battle, and the elimination is when a unit loses its last step, those units are put onto a dedicated German casualties track, and if this track becomes full during the game, you lose the game. The second way through which you can lose the game is the situation in which the Soviet deck becomes empty. The Soviets will be drawing additional cards during their moves, during their activations, and when the last card is drawn, you immediately lose the game also. So you do not have unlimited time to conquer all those hexes. You will have to act quickly, and you will have to move forward during each and every turn. Now, how a turn looks like. During your turn, while playing the German side, you will have at your disposal 5 different actions. The first one will be asking for reinforcements, because we have also a reinforcement track. As I said at the game start, you will have only 7 blocks on the entire board. You can bring additional ones using this action, so asking for reinforcement. The first thing that you do is you draw a card from your deck and you immediately play it if it is an officer card, or you can add it to your hand if it is something else. Now this card, the OKH, is a special one because it changes also the victory conditions. It will increase the difficulty because it will require you to take control of all of the hexes which are alongside the Volga river. So this will even more increase the difficulty of your initial task. At the same time, it grants you some minor benefits because you can play a game which will last a little bit longer due to the number of units that you are placing on this track. But I would like to explain rather how the reinforcement looks like. So first you draw a card and then you roll the dice. You roll all of them and you look at the results in accordance to the rows where those dice are put, and in accordance to the results you can obtain some reinforcements. For instance, if I roll a 2, I could grab a unit from the second row and I would receive, for instance, this blue unit, which would be added to my units pool. From the third row I could also grab the top unit, which is farther to the right. On the fourth row I would do one and only one thing. I would remove from the game and put on this track the unit which is depicted, which is not a good thing because I would lose this unit, but at the same time, if the OKH card was played, I could play an additional turn thanks to it. The 2/5 would grant me first a unit, and then I would also have to remove another unit from the board. Now this is problematic because, as you can see, there were not many units on the track, but at the game start this track will be full of units, and so you will be drawing a lot of them and then you will be placing them on the board. The entry hexes are on the southern part of the board where blue units enter the game. The yellow units enter the game from hexes X or Y in the center, and finally the white units can be put onto any of those hexes. So you will have three distinctive parts of the board. You will have the northern, the southern sector and the central sector from which you can move towards the Volga. Now the movement is another action which you can take. First of all, you can make a long move, which is possible on clear hexes and which enables you to move one stack up to 2 hexes. Now there is a stacking limit in this game. The maximum of blocks from one side on one hex is 4. You cannot overstack. A third possible action is 2 short moves. So you could move 2 different stacks onto 2 different locations, but here you cannot end the movement next to a Soviet stack. So for instance, I cannot move in such a way, but I could move, for instance, here and somewhere else also 1 hex in any direction. There is the possibility of splitting stacks or creating new stacks during those movements. The fourth type of action is a hasty attack. The hasty attacks consists in making a move into 1 hex from 1 other hex and initiating an attack against an adjacent hex. So in this case, I could have moved from hex 58 onto hex 41 and I could attack with everything the hex 24. The fifth type of action is a deliberate attack, which is made by units which start their activation adjacent to Soviet units, and I could attack from each and every direction onto hex 24 using all of my units which are here during a deliberate attack. Now, how attacks and how battles are fought. After declaring the attacked hex and the attacking units, the Soviet side will always draw a random card from their hand if they have any, and they will use it during this combat. If this is a hasty attack, the Germans have to play without any card. If this is a deliberate attack, I can also choose one of the cards from my hand and play it during combat. For instance, I could use a Pack or a Henkel or a Stuka in order to reinforce my units and to score some additional hits. After those declarations, the showdown takes place, so we uncover the units which are on the attacked hex. If such a unit has 0 steps, it is switched to the least possible number of steps, so that it has only one step. Combat is fought in a series of steps, and after the showdown we also uncover the cards played, and we immediately play those cards. For instance, the sniper would require me to remove a step from one of my infantry units. I always have to reduce the strongest unit. After doing so after the cards are played, we pass to the die rolls, and here, as I said earlier, red dots score hits on 4, 5s and 6, white dots on 5s and 6s, and the black dots on 6s. Combat is simultaneous unless it is fought on urban hexes, or it is fought on clear hexes if the Germans have one of the officers, Hermann Hoth, in play. So in this case, while attacking hex 044, the Soviets would attack first because it is fought on an urban hex, and I would have to take my step loss or step losses before I could counter attack. In order to eliminate units, I have to score a number of hits equal to the number of their steps. I have to reduce the strongest unit first. If there is a tie, I can choose which unit to reduce. If while attacking I manage to eliminate all the units, they, in the case of the Soviets, go back to the Soviet pool. If they are armor units, they go to the armor units bag. If they are infantry, they go to the infantry bag. Now we can also use tracks which are located on the board to store those blocks, but it is much more easy to use those bags. Very nice addition. If I managed to destroy all the defending units, I must occupy the hex with at least one block, and after doing so I end the activation. I can track controlled hexes with those cubes. Sometimes during battles it is also possible to create rubble, as I said. Those are the white discs, which are another nuisance during battle, because the defender defending a hex with rubble has to take 2 hits in order to take a step loss, so it is much more difficult to destroy units located in rubble hexes. After ending our activation, it's up to the Soviet AI to act, and this AI is pretty straightforward. It uses a very simple algorithm which is depicted on the last page of the rulebook. We verify, we check for the hexes on the board which have the largest number of Soviet blocks. In this case, we would be looking at the hexes which have 2 blocks each, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 such hexes, and we compare this number to the number of spawn hexes controlled by the Soviets, 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case, the number of Soviet top stacked hexes is greater than the number of Soviet spawn hexes, and that would mean that the Soviets would make a spawn action. The spawn action consists in putting additional units onto spawn hexes. So 1 armor unit would be placed here, 1 infantry unit would be placed here, 2 infantry units would be placed onto hex 13, and 1 infantry unit onto hex 15. No overstacking, so if those hexes are already full, the Soviets, instead of putting a unit, would draw a card. And I must underline it once more: drawing additional cards for the Soviets is always a bad information for the Germans, because if this deck runs out of cards, you lose the game. If the number of top stacked hexes is not greater than the number of spawn hexes, the Soviets will be moving, will make a move action. For each of those hexes, which are the top stacked hexes, we roll a die, and after rolling them, we will resolve them in an increasing order. So, for instance, a 1 will almost always result in drawing a card from the deck. A 4 will be a movement in the direction indicated by this algorithm. So in this case, a block would be moved onto the next hex side. But we did roll 2 4s, and if we roll doubles or triples, no movement occurs, and the Soviets will draw cards. In this case, 2 cards for the 2 4s. If such a movement would bring the Soviet units into an illegal hex, for instance, a 6 would mean a movement to the Volga River, the Soviets also would draw 1 more card. So during the Soviet actions, they will do one of few things. They will draw cards, they will move blocks, or sometimes they will attack adjacent German units. And that's it. After doing such an activation, we pass on to our next German activation, and so on until the game ends by a victory or by a defeat. And those are the major and the most important mechanics of Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga. There are some other details, but I wouldn't like to explain them. Now I would rather like to pass to a conclusion, and I would like to give you my final thoughts about this title, and to give you my opinion if this is one of the Stalingrad games that you should try. What really stands out when we look at Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga is the quality of the components which are inside of this heavy box. The game, as I said at the beginning of this video, was launched thanks to a successful Kickstarter campaign, and the fact that the sum gathered during this campaign largely exceeded the minimum sum needed influenced the quality and the number of components inside the box. So we receive additional elements such as the plain miniatures, such as the miniature of the factory, such as the docks plates, and additional ones. I haven't shown you them during this video, but I presented them during the unboxing. There are other elements which are inside this box. We have additional historical booklets covering the battle, covering the major personas which were present at Stalingrad during the time of the battle. So the quality and the number of components is really astonishing. What I really like is the map, which is firstly absolutely gorgeous to look at. Secondly, it is very accurate because it was done thanks to some reconnaissance photos done by the Germans in August 1942. It's a very detailed map which depicts both the city of Stalingrad and its suburbs. So it is absolutely gorgeous and very functional because I had absolutely no issue with this map. It is a map which is well suited for blocks, the hexes are sufficiently large, and at the same time you have absolutely no doubt what the hexes represent. It's just perfect. What I really like are also the other components. I like the cards, which are of a high quality with some nice pictures, very elegant cards with information well laid, and you have absolutely no doubt how to use them. So when judging the quality of the components, you also have to give a big thumb up to the rulebook and to the person who has prepared this rulebook, because the rules for this game are top notch. They are very elegantly laid down. They are very simple to learn, simple to explain, and at the same time, when playing the game, you can easily find all the information that you need. This is not a very complex game. The mechanics are quite simple, but I have already seen simple games which are presented in such a hard way, but that you think that they are very complex, being at the same time very simple. Here it's not the case. So the rules are very well explained without any problematic issues, without any blank spaces. You can just read the rules once and play the game very smoothly. That's something which deserves to be underlined. What I really like is the fact that this game has a huge replay value, and due to a few things. The first one is the main solo mode. Here the replay value is increased by the fact that, first of all, you have a random distribution of the Soviet blocks at the game's start. You have a random distribution of your own reinforcements. You have a random distribution of the cards. Finally, the Soviet moves or your moves done by yourself will be each time different. Of course, there will be some strategies which you will try from time to time the same way. So you will try to seize both hexes to the north and to the south of the city. Then you will try to move through the hexes alongside the Volga River, or you will try to reinforce the center in order to cut the Soviet lines into two. But each time the random distribution and the randomness of some elements will change the strategical situation and will enforce to make different decisions. I like this a lot. Having said that, you have additional game modes and variants. I haven't talked about them, I haven't spoken about them during this video, but it's now the moment to say that the game can be easily played with 2 or 3 players. In the 2-player mode, you have the possibility both to play head to head. One of the players will play the Germans, the second one will play the Soviets, or you can play cooperatively, taking control of the Germans against the artificial intelligence Soviet player. You can play this game in 3-player mode, and 2 German players will face 1 Soviet player. So it's a game very plastic in the way that you can without adding additional complex elements, tailor it to a group of 2 or 3 people if you do not want to play it solo. And each time during each mode, the game will be played using pretty much the same set of rules, which is also a thing which I highly appreciate, because there are some games with additional variants enabling additional players to participate, which are very complex, which change a lot in the core concepts of the game. Here it's absolutely not the case. Additionally, you get variants. You can play the solo mode in different ways. You can play the easy mode when you receive some officers from the start. You can play the hard mode or the impossible mode, where there are additional fortification in Stalingrad. You can play the designer's way variant, in which both sides will obtain a certain number of advantages. For instance, the Soviets can have an increased firepower when it comes to certain units, or the Germans can have additional blocks which aren't used in the basic game. So the replay value of this title is just enormous. What I really like and what I appreciate is the fact that this game is very fast to play. It is so dynamic and so climatic at the same time that it is one of the best gaming experiences that I had during the last months. Emanuele Sant'Andrea has written in his designer's notes that his objective was to create a Stalingrad game which can be played in about 1 hour. This is a difficult task because Stalingrad is first of all a very long battle which lasted for several months. Secondly, the scale of it is also huge. But in my opinion, he succeeded. He managed to create a fantastic game which can be firstly played in 60 to 90 minutes. Secondly, which still keeps most of what is part of the Stalingrad battle. So the relatively simple mechanics used in this game still have a lot of chrome and still have some elements which are at an instant associated to the Stalingrad battle. So a very clever idea was to include the deck of cards in which we have Khrushchev, Zaitsev, Paulus or Hoff, which all grant additional abilities to both players. So thanks to it, while playing this game, you really have the feeling of fighting for Stalingrad. It's not another battle, it's not an abstract battle, you just have this this feeling of participating in the Stalingrad battle. It's not something else, something elsewhere. What I really like is, because of it, what I really like is the fact that this game is very addictive. You want to play it. It's so dynamic, it's so interesting to play that I want to play it more and more, even if sometimes I lose, even if sometimes I win. I still want more, and this means that this game really has something. So what are the weaker points of this title, or aren't there any? Well, I'd say there are still three things which deserves to be mentioned. The first one is addressed to all of you who dislike dice. This game will include a lot of dice rolling. You will roll dice for reinforcements. You will roll dice to see where the Volga infantry will land. You will roll dice during battles, and those die rolls will sometimes generate outcome which will surprise you, which will cause defeats where you expected victory. Sometimes they can even decide of the outcome of the game, because if you get unlucky, if you keep rolling once for the moving Soviets and keep drawing cards, you will very rapidly end the game due to drawing the last card from the Soviet deck. It just happens. This is the way that the game had been designed, and I'm not saying this is a weaker point of this game. I would like just to give you this information because some of you, I know, strongly dislike dice rolling, strongly dislike games using a lot of dice rolls, and this game uses them a lot. I have not a big problem with games which are using dice, because I think that some randomness in war games is useful. It helps to recreate some unpredictable things, and at the same time it also helps to increase the replay value of the game. I believe that in Stalingrad, Inferno on the Volga, this limit after which we can say that the game is too random is still not crossed. You are rolling a lot of dice, but you have the feeling that you still can, due to maneuvering, due to adding additional units, playing cards, influence the outcome of the battle. So I would say that the randomness is here, but it is not a factor which will at most times decide of the outcome of the game. The second aspect, which I didn't like in this game, is the rabble role, are the rabble rules, because Stalingrad was a place which was absolutely obliterated due to heavy bombing, due to the street fights, and due to the constant shelling. And rabble should be almost everywhere. Here it is very difficult to create rabble, because you have to roll dice once more and you have to obtain a result bigger than 18. on 3 roles. So rubble will be created if you have some additional modifiers. For instance, if you used Henkel's additionally with Richthofen, or if you attacked from several hexes, and at those points maybe rubble will be placed. Playing my games, this happened very rarely, and I find this a little bit disconnected to the way that the battle was fought in reality. I said that this game recreates and simulates the battle in a very nice way. This is the only part of the game which I feel is a little bit disconnected to the real historical battle. Maybe it is a question of balance, because rubble discs give really a huge advantage to the defender, so placing them almost everywhere would make the German task almost impossible to achieve. So this is maybe a balance issue. If not, I believe it could have maybe be done a little better. The third thing which I found sometimes quite bizarre are sometimes the artificial intelligence moves which seem to be totally irrational. Well, as in many games which have an algorithm which is used to play for our virtual opponent, there are some situations where those moves seem totally irrational. And in this case, sometimes, for instance, you are attacking the last spawn hex which you have to capture in order to win the game. It's the Soviet move, and what they do, they weaken this hex by moving one of the blocks somewhere totally else. This is, from the game perspective, totally illogical. This is something that a real opponent would never do. He would defend this hex to the bitter end, reinforcing it, not weakening it. So sometimes those moves will be illogical. Are they often illogical? I would say rarely, but it happens. So at this point I would suggest maybe some house rules, some additional corrections made by us, by human beings, if we judge that the move which our artificial intelligence opponent was planning to do is illogical. This will enable a more balanced way, a more logical way of playing. But having said that, I believe that this artificial intelligence is quite nicely done. It is at most times very difficult to beat. It makes some logical moves, and sometimes it's really hard to beat. So this is at the same time also a very simple to use mechanism without a lot of additional rules, with additional structures. So it is quite nice to use. Concluding, Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga is a very interesting game, a game beautifully published, a game which uses very interesting and dynamic mechanics, a game which is really fast to play with a huge replay value, a game which has a lot of chrome, a lot of historical details, a game which at the same time uses a lot of dice, a lot of mechanics are based on dice rolls, a game in which the AI will be at most times making logical moves, but sometimes it will make some illogical moves which should be corrected by the human player. If you have the opportunity to try this game, I would definitely recommend you to try it, because if you're searching for a game about Stalingrad which can be played in 1 hour to 1 hour and a half at the same time, which is excellent for solo play, I do not know of any better choice than Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga. This was the review of Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga from VentoNuovo Games. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you also to look at our other movies. Take also a look at our Instagram and Facebook accounts. Have a fantastic day and see you next time.